On March 27, 1982, Donald Weltner eagerly anticipated the challenging and educational adventure he had planned for a group of Boy Scouts. Accompanied by his sons Christopher and Roger, Donald, a scoutmaster, had organised numerous cave exploration activities in the past year. They joined forces with another scoutmaster, Jim, and together they would guide 12 boys through the Crooked Swamp cave system in New Jersey. Setting the ground rules from the start, the group agreed to stick together in the main rooms, always stay with a buddy, and only venture into passages that had been cleared by the scoutmasters. Although the cave's narrow passages and low ceilings with only 1 foot of clearance were known to be challenging, Donald and Jim remained confident. With the boys being smaller in size, Jim and Donald would lead the way, and if they could navigate through, so could the rest of the group. While some scouts were excited about squeezing through these tight sections, others felt apprehensive about the claustrophobic conditions. However, little did they know that an unexpected encounter with a 5-inch fissure would soon turn their planned adventure into a tragic event of unimaginable consequences. This is the story of the Crooked Swamp caving tragedy. Donald, having led numerous groups to similar caves in the past, was well aware of the various reactions that children might have in such conditions. Both he and Jim were fully equipped to ensure the safety of everyone during the expedition. After reaching the cave after a hike, the entrance appeared inconspicuous. Without prior knowledge, one could easily overlook it. The entrance was a mere 16 inches high and 28 inches wide, posing a challenge for those uncomfortable with tight spaces. As they entered the cave system on that Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m, the initial path leading to the first chamber was relatively spacious compared to the rest of the cave system. The chamber's height ranged between 8 and 11 feet, providing ample room for the boys to move around in the 300 square foot area, with several larger paths branching off from it. Donald positioned himself at the east end of the chamber, while Jim oversaw the west side. Although there were several smaller tunnels branching out from the main chamber, it was unclear which was safe to explore. Donald decided to investigate a tunnel that potentially led to the next section of the cave system, ensuring it was suitable for the scouts. Standing at 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighing 160 pounds, Donald, being quite slender, was accustomed to navigating tight spaces. His 2 sons followed closely behind, ready to provide assistance if needed. Donald was no stranger to the challenges of tight squeezes and was prepared to push through in order to discover what lay beyond. He manoeuvred himself through a relatively narrow space measuring 18 by 20 inches. Although it wasn't completely constricted, he faced limitations in moving his arms backwards and struggled to lift his head to see ahead. The tunnel was covered in slippery mud, which aided his progress when the space became tighter. As he continued along, he kept his sons informed of his progress. Suddenly, the path took a turn to the right, prompting him to extend his arm to propel himself forward. However, he unexpectedly felt the ground give away beneath him, causing him to slide down into a narrow crevice. The slick mud prevented him from stopping the uncontrollable descent. While the fall wasn't from a great height, it led him to a wedge-shaped tunnel that narrowed significantly at the bottom. Donald called out to his sons to halt while he assessed his predicament. With his arms trapped at his sides, he struggled to find a way to leverage himself back up. The path sloped downward at a 30-degree angle, working against him due to the gravity. The slippery mud caused his body to sink further into the minuscule crevice, which was only 5 inches wide. Each attempt to push himself backward only resulted in the rocks tightening around him. It didn't take long for him to realise that he couldn't extricate himself without assistance. He requested Christopher to grasp his feet and attempt to pull him backwards, as he believed that, with a little help, he could free his arm and reach back to grab one of the jagged rocks he had passed. Christopher grappled with his father's muddy shoes in the cramped tunnel, struggling to gain control. Despite multiple attempts by the boys to free him, Donald instructed them to retreat from the tunnel and seek assistance from Scoutmaster Jim. Although they were undoubtedly stressed by the situation, they remained confident that an adult would be able to extract their father from the tight crevice. Jim manoeuvred his way into the constricting tunnel and discovered Donald's legs protruding from a bend in the passage. Donald was wedged at a 30-degree angle, making it incredibly difficult to pull him out of the trap. Each time Jim tugged on his legs, Donald could feel the cave constricting around his body. As Jim released his legs, the pressure eased and he slid back into the crevice. After several attempts, Jim realised that he would need assistance to free Donald. Due to the tunnel narrowing to a mere 18 inches in this area, Jim could barely reach the spot where Donald was stuck. It seemed surreal that his friend had managed to crawl forward into such a tight space, only to find himself unable to retreat. Donald explained that some rocks had become dislodged when he slid, causing them to wedge against his body. Whenever Jim pulled him towards the passage, the rocks would shift forward and block the exit, further compressing Donald's body. It was clear that the two men would not be able to resolve the situation on their own. Pulling backwards only pushed Donald further into the impossibly narrow squeeze, and there was no way for him to move forward as he pressed against the tunnel walls, which narrowed to a mere 5 inches beyond his head. Donald was astonished to find himself in such a predicament. Jim retreated from the tunnel and requested assistance. It had been almost 3 hours since Donald got stuck, and he hadn't budged. The authorities called for cave rescue experts to aid in the narrow passageways. The space was too confined for a team to manoeuvre and rescue Donald, as the tunnel only allowed one person at a time to reach his feet. The rescue teams began working on setting up ropes to extract him from the tight passage. But despite the combined effort of several individuals, Donald remained firmly wedged under the rock, unable to be freed. The rescuers couldn't access the obstruction blocking the path, and Donald's hands were trapped by his body in the narrow crevice he had slipped into. Realising that pulling wouldn't work, they brought in chisels and small jackhammers to dislodge larger rocks. Progress was slow in the cramped space, with hours passing without much success. Teams of 2 took turns entering the passage to reach Donald, attempting to warm his body with a heat lamp and placing warm water bottles around his legs. They reassured Donald that they were working on a solution to free him. He felt helpless without the use of his arms, trapped under a rock that had fallen from the tunnel's ceiling. Donald was cold and thirsty, but no one could reach his upper body to ease his discomfort. He requested that they contact his wife and inform her of his anticipated lateness this evening. Donald experienced the passing of time slowly as he contemplated how he ended up in this predicament. The extent of the isolation he must have felt in that confined space is difficult to comprehend. He was completely immobilised, physically trapped in every conceivable way, yet still able to think, breathe and speak freely. Seasoned cavers who were familiar with the cave system knew that another cave intersected with the tunnel near Donald's location. They entered from the opposite side and explored until they discovered a passage that led directly to a narrow tunnel. However, only the smallest cavers could squeeze through this passage. 2 sisters, Lynn and Nancy Taylor, who joined the rescue mission, possessed the exact qualifications needed to reach Donald. Lynn and Nancy were experienced cavers whose parents had dedicated their lives to cave exploration. Additionally, they were members of a National Cave Rescue Commission. Despite being 24 and 25 years old respectively, their petite stature was their most valuable asset in this situation. Nancy stood at 5 feet 2 inches and weighed 105 pounds, while Lynn was 5 feet tall and weighed a mere 86 pounds. Lynn utilised her diminutive frame to manoeuvre through the extremely narrow passages in Cave 2. She managed to reach the point where the 2 caves connected, but the opening was a mere 5 inches wide in that particular spot. Despite stretching as far as she could, she was unable to reach Donald's head. The winding and cramped nature of the opening kept her approximately 2 feet away from him. The team was devastated to realise that reaching him from that side would not be feasible. Consequently, the rescue team was unable to provide him with warm water or any form of sustenance. Clearly, the window of time for a successful rescue had significantly narrowed. Throughout the night on Saturday, they made multiple attempts to free Donald, but it became evident that he could not be pulled back or moved forward. They realised that they needed to explore alternative methods. Aware of the limited time, they called in a specialised rescue team and began digging, hoping to reach the section of the tunnel where Donald was trapped. It took the entire day on Sunday to approach the correct depth. Unfortunately, they were still approximately 12 feet away from the targeted tunnel. They persisted in their efforts by digging laterally, attempting to find a way to connect with the passage. By Sunday night, Donald had been stuck in a downward angle position for 36 hours. The temperature inside the caves was only 57 degrees, posing a significant challenge in keeping him warm. They had been using a heat pump to blow warmer air towards him and placing hot water bottles on his exposed legs, as that was the only part of his body accessible to them. However, the cold stone pressed against his body rendered these measures ineffective. The risk of exposure and hypothermia was greatly heightened due to the contact between cavers and the rock's surface. Late on Sunday, around 2 o'clock in the morning, they heard Donald grunting in response. Despite suffering from hypothermia, he was still alive. This motivated the rescue team to intensify their digging efforts to reach his tunnel. By Monday morning, they were nearing their goal, but encountered extremely challenging bedrock areas that could not be easily excavated. They began to fear that Donald might not survive this rescue attempt. It had been nearly 48 hours since he became trapped, enduring hunger, thirst, and constant exposure to the cold. A nurse descended into the main tunnel equipped with a handheld Doppler machine to assess Donald's condition. Despite her efforts, she couldn't detect a pulse using the instruments, as she only had access to his cold legs below the knee. This limited assessment couldn't provide a definitive confirmation of whether he was still alive, as vital organs can continue to function even after the extremities stop receiving a pulse. Realising the situation had become more critical, they resorted to using extreme measures, including dynamite. Although risky, it was their only hope of reaching him in time to save his life. Finally, on Tuesday morning, they reached his location and a doctor was sent down to confirm the inevitable. Donald Weltner had succumbed to the harsh conditions. Surviving 72 hours in such extreme circumstances was simply impossible. The team persisted in their efforts to recover his body, a task that proved to be far from simple. Even after reaching his location, it took an entire day to retrieve his remains, due to the treacherous passages and the complexity of using ropes and slings. The 150-person rescue team displayed heroic dedication, working tirelessly for 80 hours to rescue Donald Weltner. Despite their valiant efforts, the unusual circumstances of the accident prevented him from escaping the clutches of the cave. His autopsy later confirmed that he had succumbed to hypothermia and exposure sometime between Sunday night and Monday morning. He had endured these grueling conditions for at least 36 hours, possibly even up to 48 hours. Following Donald's tragic death, the cave system was closed off with limited access. A conservancy group now permits entry only to experienced cavers who are members of recognised caving organisations.